Guess what, Rosalie? My family's coming over and you're in charge of hosting them at this fancy restaurant. Can you handle that? Oh, and by the way, do you know how to manage money? You didn't save anything, did you? Rosalie was puzzled. What do you mean? What's mine is yours. So, this restaurant you own. It's mine too. Everything's free. That sounded crazy to Rosalie. Her husband Kyle seemed clueless, thinking he could just invite the family over and not pay. Something wasn't right. Plus, he didn't seem to get it. He was about to land himself in trouble. Kyle, we can't give everything away for free. But don't worry about the money. I know you don't have savings, and I knew you were inviting the family today. So, I already arranged for someone else to pay in advance. Stop lying. I never mentioned inviting the family, and none of them said anything about being billed. My husband insisted, gesturing toward our relatives. His parents, his brother, his wife, and a few others were chatting with a waitress nearby. He smirked and made fun of them while I struggled not to burst out laughing, my lips twitching. I've been getting ready for this day. I'll do my best to entertain them, just like you want, I replied, smiling to myself as I listened to him. Our in-laws approached. Hi, Rosalie. We're here to visit today. What a lovely place this is. Everyone seems to be having a great time, they said warmly, their demeanor a sharp contrast to my husband's. Mom, Dad, thanks for coming. Rosalie's happy you're here. Today's on me, my husband said casually, even though he planned to eat for free. He lied effortlessly, not just to his parents, but probably to his brother and other relatives too. He's lied before, but he's so confident he won't get caught because everyone sees him as the perfect son. Rosalie's really been excelling. She took over the restaurant from her late parents and has been running it impressively. It wasn't easy at first, but she turned things around. She's my pride and joy, he boasted to his parents, deliberately praising me, his pride and joy, to deceive them. But in reality, he barely sees me as more than a maid. As he spoke, my in-laws turned to me, nodding in approval. They've always recognized my efforts since the beginning of our marriage. Their kindness shone through their eyes. Meanwhile, my husband subtly changed his expression, silently warning me to keep quiet. Rosalie's been working hard, and Kyle's doing well too. Everything's going smoothly at Brown Trading, right? Your salary's been increasing, hasn't it? They asked. Yeah, that's correct. I'm respected at Brown Trading, and my boss has high hopes for me. I aim to lead my team through actions and results, and I'll keep up the good work, my husband replied confidently. That's our son, all right. Spending $155,000 like that isn't something just anyone can do, his parents remarked proudly, but my husband's expression darkened slightly at that moment. Today, we have 15 relatives dining with us, including my in-laws and brother-in-law's family. It's $11,000 per person, totaling $115,000. I calculated silently, knowing my husband was trying to get it all for free, unaware of the cost. When he realized it was pricier than he thought, he quickly regained composure to avoid exposing his lie. This one's on me, everyone. It's the least I can do. I just got my bonus, so no worries at all. Leave it to me, he declared, puffing up his chest as the in-laws chuckled softly. Checking the time, it was 6:00 p.m., so I guided my husband and in-laws to their reserved seats. The other relatives followed suit. Just as they were settling in, my husband shot me a creepy grin. An hour later, I approached their table in the banquet room. They were enjoying themselves, oblivious to the surroundings. Feel free to order more, everyone. It boosts restaurant sales, and Rosalie will be delighted, so go ahead, my husband encouraged, each word accompanied by a flurry of extra orders. With the banquet meals and additional orders, the bill had surpassed $20,000. Everyone assumed my husband, a corporate elite with a hefty income, was treating them. While some hesitated, my husband seemed to push them to order more. That's when I decided to set the record straight, loud enough for all to hear. Since it's Kyle's treat, I had $60,000 transferred yesterday, so everyone, please enjoy yourselves without holding back, I announced, causing a buzz of surprise among the relatives. $60,000. Classic Kyle, were words of almost admiration that flew around. While the relatives reacted like this, my husband wore a bewildered look, clueless about what was going on. I didn't miss his expression and added a line to start my counterattack. Well, the $60,000 isn't for the food. It's for alimony, actually, I stated, causing puzzled looks among the buzzing relatives. Alimony, Kyle? What's this about alimony? One of them asked. No, I don't know about any alimony. Sometimes Rosalie jokes around, so please don't mind her. Come on, Rosalie, don't upset everyone with jokes like that. My husband tried to brush it off, but he was clearly the most troubled. His face was smiling, but his eyes told a different story. The way he looked at me was terrifying. But it wasn't done. Kyle, you're the one making uncomfortable jokes here. I think it's time the family knew that, right? I said firmly, handing him a piece of paper and a bank book. As he examined them closely, his face turned pale. The alimony is for cheating. Kyle has been unfaithful. He's not the person you all think he is. He can lie and deceive people without a second thought, I revealed. The atmosphere in the banquet room shifted abruptly. The once lively chatter ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. The document I handed to my husband was the original alimony claim, and the bank book showed a record of a $60,000 transfer. Everyone's attention was fixed on my husband and me, and silence lingered for a few seconds. But it was my husband who broke it. How funny, Rosalie. That's quite something. It looks just like a real statement in a bank book. But really, this is going too far. There's no way I would cheat. It seemed like he had shifted back to his usual confident demeanor, but that confidence quickly faded, and I couldn't help but smile. What are you talking about, Kyle? You're the one who's gone too far. Not only cheating, but also trying to bully me into eating for free, lying to all the relatives that it's your treat. That's too much of a joke. Correct yourself quickly, everyone. Don't take Rosalie's words to heart. Without needing to say anything, the relatives seemed unable to believe it outright, and no one spoke up. I didn't react to my husband's words either, just watching his actions closely. Gradually, he started to panic. That's when he tried to get his parents on his side. Dad, Mom, tell her to stop these senseless jokes at a time like this. Ah yes, everyone calm down and listen to me, his dad began. Rosalie isn't making any senseless jokes. She's just stating the facts. It's undeniable that Kyle has been unfaithful, and she's not threatening Rosie. He's trying to get today's meal for free too. What are you two even saying? Are you taking what Rosie said seriously? That's not funny at all, my husband protested, but his parents seemed convinced. The only thing that's not funny is this situation. We've come here knowing everything to confront you, I declared. Yes, I had already confessed everything to my in-laws, revealing how my husband uses his outward kindness to play the dutiful son while behind the scenes he's up to no good. Even as we waited for our reservation time, he tried to deceive his parents, but they saw through his lies. Enough. I would never deceive everyone. You're ruining the good mood we had, Rosalie. What are you going to do about this? My disclosure and having the in-laws on my side were completely unexpected for him. He visibly started to lose his composure, standing up and glaring at me intensely, as if he might lunge at me any moment. Come on, brother, calm down. Let's sit down and talk this over calmly. Nicholas, you believe me, right? Interjected his brother, my brother-in-law Nicholas, cutting through my husband's angry shouts. Nicholas, busy with his own job, was attending today with his wife Yasmin. I knew Nicholas and my husband had been close since before I started dating him, and he is as gentle and consistently smiling as the in-laws. However, Nicholas's next action would utterly defeat my husband. He pulled a thick envelope out of his bag and handed it to my husband, saying, You believe me, right, brother? How can I believe you when you've been cheating with my wife, Nicholas? You what? My husband's accusation hung heavy in the air as Nicholas handed over the envelope. Inside was a report on the infidelity investigation. It turns out my husband had been cheating with Nicholas's wife, Yasmin. Just before my father-in-law had said, We've come here knowing everything, and by we, he meant the brother-in-law's family too. And it turns out, I learned about my husband's infidelity thanks to Nicholas. Hesitantly, my husband checked the contents of the envelope, turning pale as a ghost. Inside were numerous photos of him cheating with Yasmin, pictures of them dining at a fancy restaurant, looking into each other's eyes. There were photos of them being cozy in a car and others of them embracing and kissing in front of a hotel. There's no way he could just say they were just going out. It was indeed a decisive moment, a hellish scene. Is this a joke? Unbelievable, Kyle did this, were the whispers I heard. The relatives around us were in turmoil, and the banquet hall buzzed in a whole different way. For my husband, it couldn't have gotten any worse. He was completely flustered now. No, wait. This investigation report is fake. The photos must be doctored because I haven't cheated with Yasmin. We didn't cheat, right? He pleaded, trying to enlist Yasmin's support in his last-ditch effort. Immediately after Yasmin, now the center of attention, bowed deeply to the floor in full prostration. "Everyone, I am terribly sorry. I have had an affair with Kyle." Yasmin's confession stunned the room. My husband in particular was visibly shaken. He hadn't anticipated Yasmin fully admitting to the affair. He had been insisting the alimony bill and the bank book were fake, only thinking of himself and taking me for granted. He couldn't have imagined this. Yasmin's earnest apology captivated not only my husband but also the rest of the banquet hall. But it wasn't just my husband who was affected. All the relatives were stunned by Yasmin's admission. As her forehead remained on the floor, she slowly began to speak. "It really was just a fling. Nicholas is a wonderful husband, but, well, it lacked excitement, you might say. Just doing housework and waiting at home for Nicholas to return, I started to feel like my life would forever be the same. And suddenly, I got bored. When I approached Kyle, he was happy to go along." Everyone listened in silence to Yasmin's voice, mixed with regret and reflection. As she raised her head and revealed more truths, I tried to end it immediately, knowing it was wrong. But Kyle got serious about it. He threatened to expose everything if I tried to break it off. I know it sounds like an excuse now, but I am truly sorry. Yasmin's confession left the relatives staring in disbelief at such a lack of morals. Yasmin had initiated the affair, and though she was threatened, it's hard to completely sympathize with her. But she came here today to admit her mistakes and apologize, which is somewhat redeemable. However, my husband tried to escape by lying and making excuses, unaware that he was just tightening the noose around his own neck. He really is a fool, brother. It's all useless. I, Rosalie, and our parents know everything. I'm going to demand alimony from you, and you're going to pay Nicholas. When did you realize? You didn't even do an investigation. You must have been sure, right? Yes, I heard it from someone I truly despise, you, brother. Right, Rosalie? That's right. It wasn't just Yasmin. He had his hands on other women too. What, Rosalie? How much do you know? Just give me a break already. Too bad, Kyle. I know everything, and if anyone should be asking for mercy, it's us. I never thought you'd even make a move on an employee at a restaurant. I continued, then called a woman into the banquet hall. This woman was the waitress who had been talking with the in-laws, Nicholas, Yasmin, and several other relatives while they waited for their reservation time. Turns out, while having an affair with Yasmin, my husband had also been making advances towards this waitress. She had also attended the same school with me back in our student days. Before even consulting Rosalie, who was the restaurant owner, she came to me. Kyle had threatened to destroy your family if you spilled the beans to Rosalie. You're really horrible. I've said it before, but we know everything, brother. All you can do now is admit your guilt and apologize, just like Yasmin did. Kyle, let me ask you something. Why would you deceive Rosalie to carry on with your affairs? From what we can see, Rosalie has been nothing but supportive. She's been managing the restaurant that she inherited from her parents and taking care of home as well. What does she ever do to you? Under the cold stares, my husband flinched at his father-in-law's question. I thought there was no valid excuse for infidelity, but if I had been unconsciously pushing him into a corner, I wanted to reflect on myself too. Awaiting his response, what he said next was shocking. I married Rosalie because I felt sorry for her. Before our marriage, she was struggling to turn the restaurant around with both parents gone. I was the only one she could rely on. I couldn't live without that feeling of superiority. And then what? Rosalie managed to turn it around. The restaurant became popular, and suddenly I found it boring. That's why I thought of dumping her, my husband said, smirking as if he had nothing to lose. Despite already knowing his true nature, a deep disgust welled up from within. It seemed he viewed everyone but himself as mere tools. The cold stares from the relatives quickly turned to pity. A feeling of superiority felt good, got bored, and decided to dump her. Kyle, do you realize what you're saying? You're successful in your big company because Rosalie supported you. Don't you have any gratitude? No, you're wrong. I succeeded because of my own skills. Besides, isn't it normal for a wife to support her husband? Does a mother serve a father expecting gratitude? No, right? Rosalie served me because she loved me. It's presumptuous to expect gratitude for that, my husband argued. Enough, Kyle. I find you repulsive. We are cutting ties with you, but we will watch you until you take responsibility. Be prepared. Fine, cut ties or whatever. I have a stable job. I can live on my own. In fact, it's a relief, right, Rosalie? You can enjoy life more without me around. I'll pay whatever alimony or anything else, so don't worry." My husband laughed, seemingly without a care. Looking at him, I thought again, he doesn't understand anything, knows nothing at all. "Really? You can pay alimony? Aren't you about to be sued by your company, Kyle? A lawsuit for damages isn't cheap, you know," I retorted. "What? The company's suing me? That's ridiculous. You were bragging today, weren't you, that you're respected at Brown Trading, that your boss has high expectations, that you lead your subordinates with actions and results. But it was all lies. In reality, you've been threatening your subordinates and embezzling company money." "What? I would never do something like that. I rose through the ranks on my own merit." "Don't talk nonsense when you know nothing," my husband protested. "What you don't know, Kyle, is that all the subordinates you threatened have come forward. The company has been aware of the issue for a while. But you don't have to believe me, I'm just stating facts. It'll be interesting to see how far you fall," I explained to him in a calm tone, trying to make him understand. And the color drained from his face. If he really had no idea, he could have laughed it off. But the truth is, he was misbehaving at work too, so denying it was impossible. Seeing the realization dawn on him, he quickly turned, pleading, "Rosalie, you're right. I knew nothing. I'd only said those things because I wanted to leave. Please continue to support me if we divorce now." I stopped him right there. "Don't say anything more. The relatives are about to tear you apart, Kyle. It's too late for anything now, and it doesn't matter whether you knew or didn't know. No one will help you, and you'll get your wish to live alone. Oh, and by the way, make sure you pay for today's bill. It was your treat, wasn't it?" The moment I said this, Kyle collapsed to his knees. No one reached out to help him. Today, after threatening me, deceiving the relatives to get a free meal, he finds himself unable to get off scot-free. Afterwards, I filed for divorce, and Kyle was sued by his company. Kyle ended up incurring a significant amount of debt. The reason Kyle had no savings despite dealing with Brown Trading was that he was footing the bill for entertainment expenses with the employees. However, this entertainment was merely a pretext. In reality, Kyle was just squandering money at nightclubs. Given that Kyle, who had a high-paying job, had no savings, it's clear he had been recklessly spending his money. This was entirely Kyle's own doing, so he should have dealt with it himself. But instead, he asked for help from his in-laws and Nicholas's family. Of course, no one was willing to help. Kyle had defiantly claimed he could live on his own and even laughed off being disowned. So it's no surprise, yet Kyle continued his futile attempts and kept sending messages to my smartphone incessantly. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have cheated. I regret it. Please help me." The messages clearly showed he was desperate, but it felt like just another act, given his history of deceit and manipulation. It's hard to believe him still. I have not blocked Kyle's contact. I've left it unblocked so that I can receive his messages. I want to see what becomes of a person who has only thought of himself and demeaned others around him. It's uncertain what will happen to Kyle now that he has hit rock bottom. One thing I do know is that unless Kyle truly repents and changes himself, he will not be able to climb out of this pit. That much I am sure of. "Rosalie, I am truly sorry for what my brother has done. It's irreparable." Nicholas apologized to me after divorcing Yasmin. The in-laws who came with him also deeply bowed their heads. "I am a failure as a parent. I can't believe I didn't see my son's true nature sooner. If only I had realized earlier, this wouldn't have happened. Kyle took advantage of your kindness, Rosalie, and did whatever he wanted. It was our responsibility to stop him. You all don't need to apologize. If anything, I am grateful. I had no one else to rely on, no parents or relatives. So thank you for always being on my side. From the beginning of our marriage, the in-laws and Nicholas have been my allies. That I was able to turn around the inherited restaurant was possible only with their support. They are genuinely kind and always smiling. They showed such fury on my behalf that was incredibly comforting to me, who is utterly alone. I will never forget this warmth for as long as I live."
Where are you right now? Are you safe? I asked Jesus, worried about him being near a fire. But he seems annoyed and tells me he's at work before hanging up. I'm puzzled because it doesn't make sense for him to be working near a fire. When I realize he's not where he said he was, I start to suspect him of lying. I've been planning something for a while now, and it's time to put my plan into action. My name is Julia Bones, and I'm 29 years old. I work as a nurse in a hospital where I help many patients every day. I've always been good at caring for others, and I find joy in it. Nursing feels like my true calling. I'm married to Jace, and we've been happily married for 2 years. We live in company housing provided by his job, and I cherish our life together. I met Chase 3 years ago at a party where some friends were hanging out. Jace, who tends to get shy, drank a lot and ended up getting drunk pretty quickly. Even though we had just met, I couldn't leave him alone in that state, so I took care of him at my place. The next day, Jace didn't remember anything, but he said something serious like, "I'll take responsibility," which made me burst into laughter. I had to explain to him what happened, and he felt embarrassed and apologized. That's how our relationship started, and we got married a year later. Now, as we're nearing our 3rd year of marriage, we haven't had any kids yet, but I believe we can create a loving family together. Lately, Jace has been really busy with work, especially on weekends, and he often comes home acting distant. Even when we're relaxing together on the couch watching TV, he's always glued to his phone, sighing a lot. At first, I wondered if I did something to upset him, but I couldn't think of anything. As time went on, I started to worry about his health, so I began researching balanced meals and cooking healthier meals for his lunches and dinners. That day, my hospital had 2 shifts, day and night. I was supposed to work the night shift, but a colleague asked me to switch to the day shift, so I did. I meant to tell Jace about the change, but I ended up telling him on the day itself. I messaged him, saying, "I'm working the day shift today, so I'll cook dinner and wait for you," but he took a while to reply. Normally, he'd respond quickly and even use emojis, but lately his replies have been short. I wondered if he was just busy or if this was normal after being married for 2 years. Feeling a bit lonely, I rushed home after work to cook a good meal again. Cooking went really well today. I took a quick photo of the meal and posted it on my cooking account on social media. I enjoy cooking for Jace, but sharing my cooking on social media has become something I like too. A few minutes after posting, I got a notification, a comment from one of my cooking friends. I've been chatting with someone I met through my cooking account on social media lately. It's nice to have a connection outside of work, and it makes me happy. While I was chatting online, Jace came home from work. I quickly reheated the food I made and said, "Welcome home. Dinner's ready. Was your day busy again?" "Thanks, yeah, I guess I am. I'm pretty tired," Jace replied, changing into his comfy clothes and sinking into his chair, looking exhausted. I brought the reheated food over to him. "Yeah, a colleague needed my help with something urgent. Sorry I didn't tell you earlier," I explained as I sat down at the table to eat. "Let's dig in." "It's okay. It was last minute, but just let me know sooner next time. Sometimes I make plans to hang out with coworkers," Jace said. "Ah, got it," I replied, noticing Jace hadn't been eating much. "Is the food not to your liking? Did I mess up the flavors?" I asked, concerned. Jace stopped mid-bite and looked at me with an awkward expression. "No, it's not that. I just don't feel hungry right now." "Sorry, I'll save it for breakfast tomorrow," Jace said, forcing a laugh. "Thanks for cooking, though." He stood up from the table and headed towards the bathroom, leaving more than half of the food untouched, just as I suspected. I followed him to the bathroom. "Hey, are you feeling all right? You haven't seemed yourself lately. I'm worried about you. Maybe you should see a doctor," I suggested. Jace, brushing his teeth, rinsed his mouth and chuckled at my concern. "I'm okay. Maybe I just need to get back into exercising. I'm going for a walk now." "Okay," Jace said, straightening himself up and quickly making his way to the front door. "I'll be fine," he reassured as he declined my offer to join him. Even more worried, I decided to secretly follow him outside, just in case he needed help if something happened. Though that's what I told myself, deep down, there was another worry brewing in my heart. To my surprise, Jace walked briskly and stopped at a park not far from our house. He looked around and appeared to be texting someone on his phone. Soon, a white car pulled up, and Jace approached it. He exchanged a few words with the person inside. a young woman with long curly hair, giving off a flirtatious vibe. I instinctively took out my phone and snapped a photo. Before I could fully comprehend what was happening, Jace got into the car and they drove off together. Shock, confusion, suspicion, and a whirlwind of emotions filled my mind, leaving me frozen in place. Then, a message from Jace came. Met a friend unexpectedly. I'll be home late. A friend? The image of him with the woman lingered in my mind, and I couldn't bring myself to believe his explanation. That night, Jace didn't come home until after 1 a.m., and my anxiety was through the roof. Tears streaming down my face, I showed him the photo I had taken. When he saw the photo, Jace froze for a moment, then quickly brushed it off with a laugh. Oh, I just bumped into a client salesperson while I was out walking. I was just giving them some advice, nothing more. Please trust me, he pleaded, looking at me with a sad expression, as if he was the victim, shutting down any further questions. After that, Jace's work became incredibly hectic, and I found myself working overtime often when I was on the day shift. Despite our conflicting schedules, I tried to bring up the incident from before, but he always brushed it off with excuses like, I'm tired, I worked late yesterday, or I'm working on my day off today, really. During work, whenever I relaxed, thoughts of Jace and that woman being close would creep into my mind, making me feel uneasy. After finishing my night shift, the morning sun felt harsh on my tired eyes. I realized I hadn't been taking care of myself lately because of all the worry and anxiety. So, I decided to stop by a cake shop that opened early in the morning and bought myself a cake. With my mood slightly lifted, I left the store and took a different route home. There were many hotels in the area, and I often saw couples who seemed to be up to something. But maybe because it was early morning, the area was quiet. As I walked carefully to avoid damaging the cake, thoughts like, I have some tea at home, maybe we can enjoy it together, crossed my mind. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young man and woman coming out of a hotel on the opposite sidewalk. I glanced over casually, but then I froze. There was Jace, with his sleepy smile, and the woman with the long curly hair from the car that day smiling back at him. The cake slipped from my hand and splattered on the ground. In that moment, all I could think about was gathering evidence. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and snapped a picture of them arm in arm, smiling at each other. They looked like a couple in the photo. My heart raced, and I broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that Jace had been lying to me. All I could see was the fallen cake box and the damning photo of them staring back at me. In the back of my mind, I knew I couldn't stay with him anymore. One day, after a series of events confirmed my suspicions about Jace, the word divorce started to feel like a real possibility. I was working my usual day shift, busy with tasks. Suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance, signaling that fire trucks were passing through the neighborhood. It wasn't just one truck, but 2 or 3 in a row, which made me worry that there might be a fire nearby. After finishing a phone call and taking a moment to catch my breath, 2 colleagues returned from a patient's room, discussing how frightening it was. Good job. What's going on? I asked, sensing there might be trouble. They lowered their voices and told me there's a fire at Company A. A patient we passed in the hall mentioned it. Company A? A fire? Those words sent a shiver down my spine. Excusing myself from my colleagues and clutching my phone tightly, I hurried to a quiet spot. Company A, where the fire was reported, was where Jace worked. With a sense of dread, I called Jace. Like every morning, I had seen him off to work. Since the events that had unfolded, we hardly saw each other at home and rarely spoke. But I never missed saying goodbye to him in the morning. Please pick up, I whispered to myself, hoping Jace would answer. After several rings, I heard his voice on the other end, asking, Hello? Where are you? Are you okay? Despite my half-shouted relief, Jace sounded annoyed. What's going on all of a sudden? I'm at work, you know. Don't call me during work hours, he grumbled before hanging up abruptly. All I heard was the end of call beep in my ear. While I was glad to know Jace wasn't in the fire, I felt a deep unease. It didn't make sense for him to be working, as if nothing was happening. His dismissive attitude towards my concern only added to my frustration. He probably wasn't at work at all. I saw him off to what I thought was his workplace, but it must have been somewhere else. Maybe all this time, without realizing it, I've been seeing him off to another woman's place. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw shimmering long curly hair. With determination, I dialed a certain person's number on my clenched phone. After finishing my work safely, I rushed home and started packing up the furniture and appliances in the house. Then the doorbell rang, ding-dong. But it wasn't Jace at the door. It was a friend from college who knew about my situation with Jace and had offered to help me leave. Despite my sudden request for help moving my belongings from work, she readily agreed. "Thank you so much. I'll treat you to something next time," I said, feeling apologetic. But she just smiled and replied, "You've been through a lot, haven't you? I'm always here to help." I felt grateful for having such a good friend, a feeling that had faded recently, and my heart warmed. Together, we moved out the furniture, appliances, and clothes I had prepared into the car. The room, now empty of the belongings I had accumulated since my single days, felt stark and bare. Looking around, I questioned if I had any lingering attachments to my past life. "No, I don't need it anymore," I decided, feeling no pull to stay. With determination, I headed towards an apartment near my workplace. On the day I saw Jace leaving a hotel with another woman, I had rushed to a real estate agent. I wasn't sure about divorce yet, but I had rented the apartment just in case. I felt satisfied with my decision. I unpacked the items in the apartment and then remembered something. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number, waiting for the robotic voice guidance to start. Hours later, after settling in from the move, I was taking a break when I received a call. Glancing at the display, I saw Jace's name. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello. Julia, where are you? I came home to an empty house, and my phone isn't working. What's going on?" Jace's voice sounded frantic. "Most of the stuff at home belonged to me, so I took it with me. And as for the phone, it was in my name, so I canceled it," I calmly explained. His voice remained anxious. "Wait, my phone isn't working." "Well, I can only use Line because I'm connected to Wi-Fi. But more importantly, you said you took the stuff. You're not seriously running away, are you? This is a joke, right?" Jace's voice was filled with disbelief. As I listened to Jace still not grasping the situation, my irritation grew. "Are you seriously saying that? Don't tell me you forgot about the call this afternoon. Someone who's at work can't just keep working calmly when there's a fire happening, right?" Struggling to control my anger, I asked something I had wanted to know for a long time. "Where were you and who were you with instead of going to work?" There was a moment of silence from Jace. Then, reluctantly, he began to speak. "Look, the story about bumping into a female client while walking, it was a lie. The truth is, she's a colleague from work, and I was at her place today." "What?" Jace's confession was exactly what I had anticipated. He had been involved with the company receptionist, Savannah, for about 6 months. They would meet on the days I worked the night shift. Lately, as Savannah became more demanding, he had started lying about working overtime on his days off just to see her. Today, they had both taken paid leave and spent the day at Savannah's house. They only found out about the fire when Savannah's phone rang with a call from their office. After confessing everything, Jace pleaded over the phone, "I want you to forgive me." What a joke, I thought bitterly. "I'm glad to finally hear the truth from you, Jace," I said. "Despite our short marriage, I have been trying to build a good family life." Jace tried to interrupt, but I didn't let him. "I want a divorce because of your infidelity. Let's handle the details through our lawyers. Goodbye." Afterwards, the fire at company made headlines in the local news, becoming a big story. When I saw the news, I was stunned. The culprit behind the fire was none other than Jace's mistress, Savannah. Early in the morning, Savannah sneaked into the company's conference room, pulled a thread from the edge of a curtain, and lit it with a lighter. The fire spread quickly, burning down the conference room. Thankfully, the building itself suffered only minor damage. Surveillance footage clearly showed Savannah as the perpetrator. As for her motive, Savannah claimed that the married man she was dating wouldn't divorce his wife, and even her threats of exposing their relationship had no effect. She believed she had to do something drastic. Honestly, I couldn't understand why anyone would commit a crime just to be with Jace. However, according to Savannah's colleagues, she often complained about feeling lonely. Perhaps she envied the married man who seemed to have it all, thinking that being with him would fill her own loneliness. Thinking about it, I realized that feeling lonely even when you're with someone else is far more painful. Since discussing divorce with Jace, we hadn't been in direct contact, but our lawyers were handling the proceedings. Meanwhile, I heard about what was happening at Jace's company. After the fire, Jace, who was unaware of what had happened, was shocked to learn the truth from the company's general affairs representative. Savannah was arrested immediately, and news of their relationship spread rapidly throughout the company. Unable to bear the gossip any longer, Jace resigned from his job. Hearing about all this, I felt a tiny bit of sympathy for Jace, but mostly, I believed he had brought it upon himself by choosing another woman. With that in mind, I went through the divorce process without much emotion, and we successfully divorced. The evidence of Jace's infidelity, captured in the photos I had taken, made the process smooth. Additionally, I ensured that Jace paid proper alimony from his severance pay. Now that my connection with Jace was completely severed, I enjoyed living alone in my new apartment, where I had settled in nicely. Perhaps I had neglected myself by always prioritizing others. While continuing my job as a nurse, I started to rediscover the joy of cooking, which had been my greatest pleasure during my marriage with Jace, but now just for myself. In the morning, I'd open the window of my apartment to let in the fresh air. Glancing outside, I saw a happy family of 3 walking together. Seeing them, I felt no regret at all. Instead, I felt excited thinking about my future. Just then, my phone buzzed. Returning to my room, I couldn't help but smile at the screen. I had hit it off with someone I met through a cooking account on social media, and we had become close quickly. We had planned to cook together that day, responding to the message saying, "I'll be there soon." I began preparing the meal we were going to cook. A big renovation project for taking care of older folks. It costs $30,000. But wait, what's happening? That's the house of my wife's parents, isn't it? A man on the phone claims to be married to my wife's estranged sister. The talk is all confusing, so it seems like my sister-in-law might be planning something. My name's Martha, and I'm 56 years old. I stay at home. My kids, a son and a daughter, are grown-ups now and don't live with us anymore. It's just me, my husband, and his parents living together. We all get along well, which is nice because I lost my own parents when I was young. My husband and I were supposed to live with his parents when we got married, but my mother-in-law, who had a tough time with her own mother-in-law, had the house changed so we could have our own space. Even though we share the house, we each have our own private area. That's probably why we get along so well. My husband still works during the day, so I spend a lot of time with my in-laws. One day, while my father-in-law was busy on the farm, I was getting lunch ready in the kitchen. I planned for us to eat outside together. Then we got a call from one of my father-in-law's friends on the farm, saying he fell and hurt himself. They rushed him to the family doctor in a truck. My mother-in-law and I left the food and hurried to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, they were rushing my father-in-law into emergency surgery. Despite seeming healthy, he was in his 80s, and recovering from a fracture would be tough at his age. The doctors warned us that he might need a wheelchair afterwards. But I was determined. As long as he's alive, that's what matters. I'll be there to support him, I said. We waited nervously while he was in surgery, hoping for the best. By the time my husband finished work and joined us, the surgery was over. We were relieved to see my father-in-law sleeping peacefully in his hospital room, without any major complications. We decided to stick together and support him through his recovery. But sadly, Our hopes were dashed when my father-in-law passed away suddenly a month later. His age had made him vulnerable, and he caught an infection after the surgery. Since many of his friends and relatives were also elderly, we didn't want to upset them by spreading the news of his passing. So, after discussing it, we opted for a small family funeral. But even that didn't solve all our problems. What about my sister-in-law? I asked my mother-in-law and husband. They didn't look happy, probably remembering her troubled marriage. My in-laws weren't happy about my sister-in-law's marriage. They strongly opposed it. While my husband wasn't as against it, he wasn't thrilled either. This created tension between them, and their relationship became distant. But she was still their daughter, so shouldn't she be allowed to attend the funeral? They agreed that if we could find her, she could come. But we couldn't reach her, so the funeral went ahead without her. It's just how things are with her. It's fate. Don't worry about it, Martha. My mother-in-law told me as we returned home from the crematorium with my father-in-law's ashes. My father-in-law's sudden death caught us all off guard. We weren't prepared for it mentally. We rushed through the funeral and cremation. We held his ashes, lit incense, and spent the next few days feeling lost. It's easier when my husband is here. We can talk and support each other. But when he's at work, I can't bear being alone in the quiet house, so I go to my mother-in-law's room. I know my mother-in-law is going through even more pain and sadness than I am. After all, she lost her husband suddenly, someone she had been with for so many years. So even though it's hard, I try to act cheerful around her. But my mother-in-law was more accepting of the situation. I thought I'd be in this state for the next 49 days, but yes, we can go through his things later. But you know, I'm already over 80, my mother-in-law said. You look so young for your age, mother-in-law, I replied. Not being sick often, she'd mentioned that the only time she was ever in the hospital was when she gave birth. Basically, she was telling us that she's healthy and we don't need to worry about her. You're so kind, Martha, but while I can still move around, I want to go through our things, including his, she said. I get it. It's important to keep those memories safe, like my father-in-law's belongings, I replied. Got it. Just tell me if you need any help, I offered. She asked me right away to help her reach things that were too high for her. As we looked at old photos of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law happily talked about their younger days, sharing stories about their trips and adventures. I listened closely, nodding along. The phone rang, breaking the quiet of the room. Since my mother-in-law doesn't use a smartphone, the landline is her main way of communicating. I wonder who's calling. Only a few people usually call, and they're all close friends who know what's been going on, I thought. It could be important. I'll get it, I said, realizing it would be easier for me to answer than for my mother-in-law, who had been mentioning how hard it was getting for her to move around. I quickly answered the phone by the entrance, and a man I didn't recognize greeted me politely. He said he was my sister-in-law's husband, but I'd never met him before, so I wasn't sure if he was really who he claimed to be. As I listened, I started to wonder if this was some kind of scam targeting older people. Then he said, I want to talk to you about the home renovation for caregiving, but my father-in-law had already passed away. Why was he bringing up caregiving renovations now? Did he get the wrong house? No, my mother-in-law didn't need that level of care. Excuse me, but are you sure you have the right house? I asked cautiously. The man claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband mentioned her maiden name, which matched my husband's family. So there was no mistake that this was their family home. Plus, the name matched my sister-in-law's. It's true that the woman you mentioned is my husband's sister. Thank you for believing me. With all the trouble our marriage has caused, I was worried I had made a bad impression again, the man said. I wasn't sure why my in-laws were so against my sister-in-law's marriage, but I didn't get a bad impression from this man at all. In fact, he seemed very humble and sincere. My brother-in-law explained that he heard the caregiving renovation would cost around $30,000. He felt bad for any trouble he may have caused and wanted to make up for it. He planned to pay the $30,000, but couldn't get the money ready by the deadline. He called to ask if we could possibly wait and extend the payment deadline. It's awkward to let him explain everything before saying this, but since he spoke with such passion, I failed to convey the truth. I thought to myself, thanks for being polite. Now, about the extension, just hold on a sec, I said, then turned to my mother-in-law. When did you find out about the changes to caregiving? I asked her. My father-in-law was really healthy and was working on the farm until recently, she said. So you didn't need any caregiving help at all? I double-checked. No, not at all. Wait, are you talking about the past? She realized. Yes, my father-in-law died. We buried him and cremated him recently, I told him. I understand. Well, I could imagine him getting flustered on the phone. He must be confused because of what his wife told him and what actually happened. I had planned to stay like this until the 49th day, but yes, we can go through his things later. But you know, mother-in-law, I'm already over 80. You seem much younger than 80, mother-in-law. She rarely got sick. She'd mentioned that the only time she went to the hospital was to give birth. Basically, she was saying she's healthy and we don't need to worry about her. You're thoughtful, Martha, but as long as I can still move around, I want to organize my stuff, and his too. I get it. I don't want anyone else going through my father-in-law's things and memories either. Got it. Just tell me if you need a hand, I said. She quickly asked me to assist her in reaching things that were too high for her. While we were sorting through old photos of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law joyfully recalled memories of their younger years, recounting tales of their travels and adventures. I listened closely, nodding in agreement when the landline rang. Since my mother-in-law doesn't have a smartphone, the landline is her primary way of communicating. I wonder who that could be, I remarked. There were only a few people who usually called, and they were all close friends who knew our situation. I thought they might avoid calling if they knew, but it could be an emergency. I decided to answer it. It was better for me to move rather than make my mother-in-law, who had been mentioning how hard it was to sit and stand, get up. So I quickly picked up the phone near the entrance. A man's voice I didn't recognize greeted me. He introduced himself as my sister-in-law's husband, speaking very politely. However, I had never met him before. I wasn't sure if he really was who he claimed to be. As I listened, wondering if this was some new scam targeting elderly people, he said, I want to talk to you about the home renovation for caregiving. My father-in-law had already passed away. Why was he bringing up caregiving renovations now? Did he mistake my mother-in-law for someone else? No, she didn't need that level of care. Excuse me, but are you sure you have the right house? I asked. This is my wife's family home, right? The man claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband mentioned her maiden name. It did match my husband's family, and there was no doubt this was their home. Plus, the name matched my sister-in-law's. It's true that the woman you mentioned is my husband's sister. Thank goodness. Thank you for believing me. With all the trouble our marriage has caused, I was worried I had made a bad impression again. I don't understand why my in-laws were so against my sister-in-law's marriage, but I don't feel any negativity towards this man. In fact, he seems really humble and sincere. According to my brother-in-law, he heard that the cost of caregiving renovations would be around $30,000. He wants to do his best to make up for any inconvenience he may have caused. He shared all this with me, seeming genuinely honest. I asked him how the story about my father-in-law needing care came up. He brought it up a few years back. At first, he seemed to be sending a fixed amount every month to help with caregiving expenses. But it was clear that neither my father-in-law nor mother-in-law had heard anything about it. If they had known, my mother-in-law would have invited him to the funeral, he explained. Her mother was thankful and said it helped, so I thought maybe I was slowly being forgiven. But if she was forgiving you, wouldn't she have talked to you about it? I questioned. That's right. What's more, the amount of money he sent each year kept going up. He was sending more money every month, thinking we had requested extra help. But we didn't remember asking for anything like that. So none of that money actually reached you? I asked. When I confirmed, I could imagine him getting really upset. It was difficult for me to share this information as well. As I listened, I started to wonder if my sister-in-law. I can't say for sure if you're being scammed, but I hesitated. You don't have to sugarcoat it. I am being scammed, right? He interrupted. I couldn't outright confirm or deny it, so I stayed silent. He probably took my silence as confirmation. What should I do? He asked. Even though it wasn't really my place to answer, assuming he was indeed being scammed, I couldn't just leave my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, alone, despite our strained relationship. I told him we'd talk about it and get back to him later, and that was the end of the call. When I went back to my mother-in-law, she remarked, "That was a long call. Was it a persistent salesperson? You should just hang up on those." "No, it was a man claiming to be my sister-in-law's husband," I replied. I then told my mother-in-law about the conversation. She was shaking with anger as she listened, and her fury only intensified afterward. What kind of person is she, using her father as an excuse to ask her husband for money? She exclaimed. It seemed that my sister-in-law had a history of being irresponsible with money, buying expensive things she couldn't afford with her allowance or earnings from part-time jobs. Her behavior seemed very suspicious. When she wanted to marry, her partner was a man with a significantly high income and a lot of pre-existing wealth, which made her parents strongly against the marriage. Their opposition wasn't for my sister-in-law's sake, but because of her partner. Afterward, we decided to wait at the house of the person responsible, along with her husband, for her to come back home. I couldn't recall the last time I saw my sister-in-law. When she decided to date her then boyfriend with marriage in mind, she introduced him to her parents and brother. There was some uproar about her marriage, but since I wasn't yet part of the family, I didn't attend. So this would be my first meeting with my sister-in-law's husband. From what I gathered over the phone, he seemed sincere and pleasant. I had heard he earned well, but he didn't seem to live extravagantly. It seemed he was trying to live modestly. However, if one of the reasons for this was my sister-in-law's deception, it must be a mix of complicated emotions, meeting my sister-in-law again after many years. My sister-in-law, who never expected her mother to be at her home, was so surprised that her eyes widened as she stood frozen. The impression I had of my sister-in-law was of someone who liked flashy things, but the sister-in-law in front of me was excessively flashy and lacked any sense of style, which was hard to watch. The three of us had agreed beforehand to go along with my sister-in-law's story. Initially, we decided not to bring up the fact that she was lying. It's been a while. I'm glad to see you're doing well, I said kindly. When my sister-in-law was suddenly spoken to with kindness, she stammered in response to her mother. She probably thought her lies had been found out and that she was going to be scolded, but she seemed confused by the unexpected kindness. I wanted to see your face after all this time. Have you been doing well? Her mother continued. We didn't tell her the truth about her father's passing and kept up the pretense that he was still alive. I also apologized for not staying in touch and gave a suitable greeting. My sister-in-law humbly said she was glad her mother seemed well and that she had been worried about her. However, she didn't mention her father. It would be awful if the conversation turned to him, and the topic of caregiving expenses slipped out of my husband's mouth. It seemed my husband and she had met before, but it seemed her lies hadn't been exposed. She probably thought she could get away with it and not get caught. Your mom looks happy. It seems you two are getting along well as a couple, my mother-in-law said happily. She hoped my sister-in-law would have a change of heart and start repaying her husband bit by bit. The idea was to shower her with praise in hopes of encouraging her to change her behavior. Somehow, my sister-in-law got carried away and told my mother-in-law that she would support her if she ever needed caregiving, even saying not to worry about money. It's surprising she could say such things in front of her husband, who had been supporting her out of goodwill, I thought. We expressed our gratitude and left that day. My sister-in-law was acting strange, asking for a lot of money. We suspected she was using it for herself. We didn't know where all the $30,000 went, so we hired a private investigator to check her money situation. The money meant for taking care of someone each month was actually being used by her for herself. But it turned out she was also spending a lot of money on a guy she really liked at a club, trying to make him the best. She was spending too much, buying expensive things and getting into debt she couldn't pay back. The guy she liked owed a lot of money to, around $30,000. When my sister-in-law's husband found out, he got really mad. He decided he couldn't ignore it anymore. He made plans while she was away with the guy she liked, not knowing anything about what was going on. My sister-in-law came back home after a few days and found that her house was totally empty. There wasn't any furniture or anything belonging to her left. She started to panic and tried to call her husband, but he didn't pick up. So she called me instead. At first, she was really upset, but when I mentioned her trip with the guy she liked, she suddenly became quiet. She didn't ask how I knew about it because then she would have to admit what she did. Now it was my turn to tell her everything without giving her a chance to argue back. I can't believe you thought you could get away with this and took advantage of everyone. You betrayed your mother, your husband, and now it's hard to see anyone wanting to help you. I told her firmly. I also mentioned that the excuse she used about her father-in-law wasn't valid anymore because he had passed away. I understood she didn't know about his death, but it was still wrong to use her father's situation to ask for money. I let her know that her ex-husband also found out the truth, and feeling abandoned, she screamed like a mad person over the phone. Her ex-husband didn't want to talk to her, and to avoid troubling my elderly mother-in-law any further, I offered to be the middle person between them and my sister-in-law. She kept causing a scene over the phone. It was kind of sad to see her like this, not even realizing her father had passed away and still using him as an excuse. She might feel sorry for it later, but it's too late now. I gave her one final message. Your ex-husband plans to ask for all the money back that you gave to the guy at the club. You'll have to find a way to pay off the $30,000 debt on your own. Later, she got legal documents from a lawyer. She wanted to talk to her husband about it, but he refused. He was really angry and didn't want anything to do with his ex-wife, even for legal stuff. Without any agreement, my sister-in-law had to live on a tight budget and work hard. She couldn't afford to spend money at the club anymore, and the guy she liked stopped paying attention to her, leaving her with just the big debt she owed. Sometimes, scary debt collectors would come around. My sister-in-law was naturally scared, always worrying about the lawyer's letters and the debt collectors showing up. As for the rest of us, we went back to our normal lives. It took a while to go through my father-in-law's things, but we decided to move on as a family, including his part. Recently, my mother-in-law has been getting weaker, and I think she might need care soon. Since we couldn't help my father-in-law, my husband, and I agreed to do our